Hello, everybody, and welcome to this new edition of our weekly Improving Talks. Thank you for joining us. Remember that you can use the Q&A function located at the bottom center of the screen to send your questions to the presenter, and we will also have a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the session. Today's presenter is our senior consultant, Jonathan Camera, who's been at Improving for 5 years and is joining us from our office in Houston. Jonathan has been working in DevOps and platform engineering for the last 9 years, and aside from work, he loves to spend time homeschooling his family and continuously learning. Without further ado, I'll leave you with Jonathan. I'll be in the background checking our chat and the Q&A. Please don't hesitate to send over your questions. Jonathan, all yours.
All right. Thank you, Miguel. So welcome, everyone. So we're going to be talking about turbocharging your CI/CD process. So obviously, that means that there's at least some idea about what CI/CD is, but we're going to need to break it down a little bit further and go back down to some of the fundamentals in order to talk about this. But let's talk about why. See, because you've been brought into a company that feels like they're stuck in low gear. See, a competitor has suddenly started releasing features more frequently and is rapidly capturing market share. Your customers are clamoring for similar features, but it's projected to take 6, 12, 18 months to deliver them. The company really needs to hit that accelerate progress without sacrificing their reputation for having a solid and stable product. And when you talk with company leaders, they're complaining that the developers are taking too long, despite there being a CI/CD process already in place. So you want to pop the hood and start tackling the problems that you discover. Well, hold on a second there. Before we open that hood, let's make sure that we review some fundamentals to have a good handle on what are the tools and processes that we have, and that way we can, when we resolve the problems, we can do so with speed and stability. Otherwise, we're liable to make things worse. So let's talk about these some business fundamentals. So this is going to be using a somewhat simplistic model, but the idea is that business is really about, first, discovering the needs of customers, or the customer bringing a problem to you and saying, hey, so I need to solve this problem, and how can you help me out? Okay, or I think that you'll be able to help me out. From there, you're then able to work on creating a solution to help meet those particular needs. And then from there, you then get paid. Now, this is, again, a simplistic model. You're looking for the needs, you're creating a solution to solve those needs, and then you are and then there's an exchange that usually occurs in order so that way you can continue looking for new needs and the customer is able to get your solution. And as long as you continue to meet the needs of your customers and they continue to pay you, then the business itself can continue. Now, when we're talking about CI/CD, we're focused on the creation of the solution to meet those needs. So let's dig into how CI/CD is supposed to help in this area, some of the fundamentals. Now, let's first off talk about what we mean when we talk about CI/CD. Usually CI/CD refers to continuous integration and continuous delivery. For some, they may hear that and go, I know what that is. And some people will hear that and go, say what? Because these are actually two very useful abstractions to talk about what it is that, that we're trying to do with this process. And about that asterisk on delivery, we'll get to that. But first, we're going to focus on integration. And why does it need to be continuous? So what is integration? Well, I like to get an idea about where a word comes from. And so let's go look back at the history of where this word came from and understand how it relates to what we're trying to do within the business. So the word integration itself comes from the word integrate, which following the American Heritage Dictionary, is to make into a whole or to bring all the parts together, to unify things. And that, go further a little bit further, comes from the Latin word integro, which is I make whole, which also comes from the word integer, which it looks an awful lot like the word integer. Interesting. And that, if you even break that even further and go further back, it comes from in tango, or to be in touch. It's kind of like you could say that you're literally keeping in touch with whenever you're doing integration work. Now, we've already mentioned one way in which the business is doing integration, if you're paying attention. When you're discovering a customer need, the business has identified where there's something that's incomplete with the customer. And so they are trying to find some way to help, in a certain sense, to make the customer be made whole. And the other part is that as a business grows, as you bring in more people to help you with solving these, discovering and solving these problems, you're going to find that integration inside of the company is going to become increasingly important. And otherwise, you will fail to put together a cohesive product or service that actually meets the customer need. And so the only way that you can maintain that cohesiveness is if you're working to integrate continuously. As you can see, being continuous, making sure that you're working together in order to meet that need. So when talking about continuous integration, the broader sense is that you're frequently integrating the different parts of the business to make sure that you're meeting the customer need. Though most often when we're talking about this, we're talking about the daily merging of code from different developers and then running tests against it to make sure that you are still actually delivering what you're being asked to work on. This practice of continuous integration arose from those situations where developers would sometimes say, oh, I think I know what I want to do. They would then go create a branch, work on it, and be learning along the way about what they're doing. And then you have another developer who'd go off and do their own thing in the same way. But then whenever you went to go merge the two together, it wouldn't work. And so because of that, you'd end up with these big blowups because integration was happening very rarely. And so by moving towards doing it more continuously, then you end up with these little, it's a bunch of little bitty fires that you can work your way through and that you can handle much more quickly rather than having this big blow up at the very end. But again, we're really only focused at this point on how the business works on the product itself. And we still need to get to where the product gets into the hands of the customer. So whenever you're doing that, that's where continuous delivery happens. And because delivery is, again, the delivering of the need of the product to the customer. But let's talk about that asterisk for a bit. So when you're working on this, that the reason why there's been a little bit of a debate that goes on between whether you should be doing continuous delivery or deployment. Now, for continuous delivery, you're talking about where something is available for deployment to production. The team will work on the product, and then whenever it's time to get it into the hands of the customer, there's someone who's sitting there saying, hold on, not yet. Okay, now. Continuous deployment is where something is immediately deployed into production. You're saying, okay, I've done it. It's run through all the tests. We're immediately sticking it out there where, in the hands of the customer. Now, this comes into a question of how we've decided to integrate with the customer. So again, it's really just another kind of integration, but it's the integration of, okay, we've done the integration inside the business about making sure that everyone is aligned to what we think is what we need. The delivery side is all about how do we integrate with the customer to make sure that they are being handed the service in the way that actually helps them out. Now, There are some that would say that continuous deployment is unsafe at any speed and would prefer to stick with something like continuous delivery. Now, this does mean that you've intentionally introduced a manual gate and likely a bottleneck to get the product into the hands of the customer. And most often, that's being done in order to mitigate some business risk that's done whenever you go and put something out there and it's not exactly what the customer wanted. But at least you can say, well, we made sure that we checked every single box before we got it out there. But what do you think would be needed in order to actually remove that bottleneck? Now, some of the discussion around that question and some other questions as well led to the rise of DevOps. Now, I'm not saying that it was specifically this conversation that had it, but it was part of many other conversations that all happened that led to DevOps. Where in DevOps, the whole purpose was to enable this fast flow from, hey, I have an idea all the way through to, hey, it's in the hands of the customer, and getting the feedback from that. So that way you could then learn some more and then make another iteration upon the product. Again, the wonderful thing about DevOps is that it spawned an entire movement that, of course, popularized initial implementations, but the speed was associated with risk. And then also with the increasing cybersecurity attacks, there was a desire to emphasize how security was integrated throughout, which that leads to DevSecOps. And this was to help emphasize that security is baked in throughout the entire process. But of course, the speed and this additional stability that we were able to integrate throughout, I started saying, hey, we want to do our own thing. And so now you have finance talking about FinOps. And then you have other members of leadership who are starting to talk about BizOps. Yeah. So not to mention that with all the buzz around artificial intelligence, there's now a push for ML ops and AI ops, and you get the picture. So, but what we need to remember is that ultimately, we're talking about is ways to increase integration throughout the business in order to more quickly deliver a product that will fulfill the customer need. So, now that we've kind of gone through all of that initial stuff, let's open the hood. Let's find out what's really going on. So you go and you say, okay, we're going to walk through this. We'll do a value stream mapping exercise. It's going to be great. And so you get through the entire process and you end up with a process that looks something like this. Ow. But when you dig into what are the reasons behind this, you realize that a lot of this is due to managing risk and also making sure that you're trying to include everyone who can be involved. But the problem is that they keep delaying the value that could be created right up until your competitor figures out how to deliver it first. So you're going to need to come up with a way to help continue to manage the risk and make sure that people are involved while still continuing to deploy quickly and stably. Well, how about let's start with speed and then mitigate risk as needed. Maybe by taking a razor to this whole process, you can cut out everything that's unnecessary. So you start with your MVP. And you say, hey, you've got your customer over there on the right. You've got your developer on the left, and the developer is updating the code in production. No. We're not going to do that. The idea of giving someone the ability to make changes in production is a bad idea. So, that's much better. And this is where I say, okay, you've now created your minimum viable pipeline. You have version control and a basic integration and deployment pipeline that as code is checked in, It runs those checks and deploys into production. Well, again, that might work for a small startup, but we're talking about a large organization here with multiple developers. So that means you need to make sure you're involving with team collaboration. Now, the nice thing is that because we already have version control in place, then the idea of, hey, we're going to branch off and everything else, we can work on from there. But again, it's way too easy in this particular situation for two developers to separate out, one to work on, their particular feature, another one to work on their particular feature, and then you bring them together and again, kablooey. So what could we do? We could do something is gaining some cachet in the industry. Some may see it's a little crazy, but that idea is that they could have them work together as pair programming. Oh, that's a good idea. Now you have the developers working together on a single feature in order to get it out the door. But wouldn't that mean you slow down? Well, but it does mean that they all have a shared understanding about the code. And in fact, you can go one step further and go with mob programming, where you have a whole bunch of developers all working together on the code. But that's often, especially with now we were talking about like having a lot of people who want to be remote first or do remote only. How would you do that? Well, there is a tool for that. There's actually multiple tools for this. One example is something called Microsoft LiveShare. Now, this is actually a tool that allows you to edit code in a similar way that you could work inside of a Word document or inside of a Google Doc. And you can now have multiple people working on the code at the same time and being able to stay remote with each other. Now, this may give developers more speed in terms of being able to collaborate with each other. But then you're faced with another problem in which you've got to make sure that you can deploy these changes into production. And how do you know that the production system, the underlying infrastructure, is ready to handle the large number of customers that will be hitting your service? And what happens if a bug still makes it through to production? So for that, you end up with something that looks kind of like this, where you'll have an artifact store that could be for a container, it could be for a NuGet package or for a jar. And from there, so that way, then you can push your changes. You have something that is now versioned, that is of the specific code and all its dependencies and everything else that the team has been using. And then from there, those are being what is deployed into production. Now, this gets us back. At this point, we've now successfully kind of separated the build and deploy part, and we're back into a more familiar CI/CD type paradigm. But we could go a little bit further. You see, if we bring in an orchestrator that could be notified of the changes, deploy the updated application, and handle the automated rollback and scaling, that actually would help you go just that little bit faster, because now you're able to make the changes, deploy it out. Hey, if you're seeing an increase in traffic because, oh my goodness, this feature is amazing, the application itself will scale. So what I often see happening is people introducing Kubernetes and then leveraging something like Argo CD in order to find out, hey, these are the changes that were made. Let's pull in whatever those changes are from the artifact repository or anything else, and we'll make sure that that you have a system that's somewhat self-healing, which is great for ensuring that the application is up. But what if the problem isn't that the application is crashing, but that there was some problem in whenever the entire business came together in order to integrate and make sure, hey, we're actually delivering what the customer needs. And it turns out that now customers are leaving because we missed something. Maybe that new feature is actually driving them away, or you made a change to a feature and it's like, oh, they don't like us anymore. So what's one thing that you can do in order to go past that? This is where you go for feature flags. The nice thing about feature flags is that or you call them feature toggles, that if a particular feature isn't working as expected, you can disable it in production. It also means that you can deploy and test new features in the production environment and then flip the switch to release the change to your customers. Even better, you can now start segmenting up your customer base and saying, hey, we're going to test out this new feature on this small portion again and compare it to the rest. And if all of a sudden we say, hey, they're now happier because of this new feature, roll it out to the rest of the environment, to the rest of the environment. So at this point, you actually have a CI/CD process that is incredibly fast. The developers are making changes they're collaborating together. They're once all the automated checks are going through, it's being deployed. It's being produced into an artifact that, if need be, can be rolled back automatically. You now also have a production system that's scaling automatically, and if something is wrong from a business hypothesis perspective, you can now say, oh nope, that was a bad idea, and turn it off. As well as being able to scale it out depending upon the changes, depending upon the particular business metrics you're trying to hit. And so there's one more thing that I haven't gotten to yet. What if you added AI to this? What if you decided, hey, let's start sprinkling artificial intelligence everywhere? Okay, well, what might that look like? So let's see. For these mob programming developers, we could give them Copilot. That would help speed up the writing of code, and even potentially in helping write commit messages and any PRs that do need to happen in case they do need to work asynchronously and can't all be working at the same time. For the CI/CD process, you've got security scanners that are going through there, as well as performance tests that are being run. Those can now actually propose. I've been seeing this now is in something like GitHub Advanced Security, where they are now proposing auto fixes. They're actually opening their own pull request saying, hey, I noticed this problem. Here's a pull request that fixes it. And then for feature flags and some of the stuff we're doing around GitOps, we can actually increase where we're looking for signals to show that our service is doing well. We can actually start, instead of only looking at the specific metrics of like, oh, hey, our products are going this direction or whatever, we can actually go and look at things like, hey, I'm going to go and read Reddit and say, oh, hey, the sentiment around our product has improved or what have you, and being able to then adjust those feature flags or make tweaks to exactly how our application is scaling in order to make sure that or performing to make sure that it's meeting what the customer needs. And then for our customers themselves, they can now have a conversation with where our service is used under the hood, where the integrations that happen with other vendors can just happen seemingly magically because you have something like ChatGPT or Microsoft Copilot stitching the different pieces together and leveraging your service in order to ensure that the customers get what they need. Now, this is all well and good. And it definitely does help us move even faster. But there's actually even a few things, but sadly, they're on the horizon. And so they're not all the stuff that I'm talking about so far is stuff that I've seen in use somewhere. But there are a few things on the horizon that I think would be worth taking a look at. For example, as they're working through all the different AI agents, there's this thing called Copilot Workspace that I've seen that GitHub's been working on. This is a really cool tool, but the problem is that a lot of the people who are working with it is under NDA. But the vision is that, say you have a problem that you're dealing with, or a story that you're creating for with the customer. You write the story, and then GitHub Copilot then takes the story, fleshes out, here's the design, here's the subtasks that need to happen. It then, based upon that information, then generates all the pull requests that need to occur. And then all you have to simply say is, yep, that looks good. Yep, that looks good. Nope, I'm going to modify this. No, let's change this over there. And then it goes and is sitting there in the background, looking at the changes you're making and then continuously tweaking and changing how things are going on in the background. So that way you can be that much closer to, hey, here's a problem that the customer is seeing, to, hey, here's a fix that we actually are able to deploy into production in order to meet that new customer need. Again, when I was talking about being able to start integrating into different services, Copilot extensions is actually one of those examples where it can reach out and start pulling information out of Azure or pulling information out of a feature flag tool like Launch Darkly, and being able to say, hey, I'm noticing that we're seeing these particular problems, and being able to surface that information up to the developer. And that way, then they can make additional changes, either whether it's in the code base or in order to understand, hey, I know we had some information from the customers about this. Hey, Copilot, what did the customer say about this? That's additional information context that you can now pull in as while you're working on your code, as well as while you're just having discussions with your team about what are the new things that you can do in order to pull things together. Now, the amazing thing about having all of this is that it ultimately creates what I would like to refer to as the best bottleneck. And the best bottleneck is where you're actually spending the majority of your time, not in the development of the code, not in the deployment of the code, not in the operations of everything. You're spending more of your time talking to your customer, seeking to understand what is their need and how you can meet that need in order to achieve both continue business for yourself, as well as to go find new needs, go find more customers in order to keep going and keep working and making things better for everyone overall. So we're just about at the end. Here's some references that I wanted to leave y'all with that I leveraged as I was going through this. So that way you can have an idea about some of the information that I was pulling from in order for this talk. And then also, I am working on an example of this. I actually, thankfully, at a place where I'm working at right now, they have these planning sprints and innovation and planning sprints that they do. And so they said, you have 2 weeks, go find something that you might think might be valuable to the company. Okay, cool. So I went and worked on kind of an initial implementation of this. And I'm now working on a refinement of that on my own to see if I can come up, take all of these different ideas that I just shared here in this presentation and actually make something that physically works. And so that way, then I can not only say, hey, here's a bunch of really cool ideas, and I think this would be great to be able to integrate it all together and say, I have a working example, and I'd like to help you out in how to get it implemented in your place. So that's it for my presentation. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Jonathan. Definitely. We have a couple of questions here. The first one by Daniel says, it sounds like the ideal CI/CD will be a new from scratch process. How might you build up an existing process? How to build the buy-in for the speed first with the host business?
So again, this was meant as more of a art of the possible, which is part of the reason why I kind of said let's cut it all the way back and see how far we can get. That said, usually when it comes to the like how do you go about this, it's a question of where is the bottleneck? Where is the bottleneck in your deployment process? And what is it that's leading for that bottleneck to be there? The model that I'd probably end up leaning on quite a bit actually is the Theory of Constraints by Goldratt, where basically the idea is find out where your bottleneck is, then make sure you slow everything down to be working at the speed of the bottleneck. So that way that way you can say, this is the tempo that we're working at. Then find a way to then overcome, spend any time that you're spending on improvement in your process on speeding up that bottleneck and seeing if you can find a way to eliminate it. So when it comes to working on your CI/CD process, then if the problem is at, hey, our developers are having a hard time, we keep having these merge conflicts, invest in trying to speed up how often they're putting their things together. Is it in the running of all of the different checks? Verify that you actually need all of them, or find ways to do them more asynchronously, so that way they're not all lumped up together and you're having to do them all sequentially. Or if the problem is in, hey, anytime that we go to deploy something, it always seems to fall over. And so we're really hesitant unless we're really, really sure. That may mean it's time to go and invest some in infrastructure and make sure that that you have something that is a little bit more elastic whenever it comes time to deploy your application and have the customers come in. That said, there are times whenever you're dealing with a situation that's just like, nope, that was a black swan event, and you have to kind of write it off. Like, what was it? Hey, I'm gonna go buy tickets for the latest Taylor Swift concert. So are several million other people. Yeah, good luck. Hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Jonathan. We have a similar question to the latest one that says, is it possible to start small with CI/CD and expand progressively until fully covering the application? It sounds counterintuitive to CI/CD just one part of the system.
Yeah. More often than not, that comes down to a more question around, like, how is your system composed? If you're dealing with a situation where it's like, no, we deploy this great big thing and we're doing it, then if you're working iteratively, what I tend to see is more start with the CI part and worry about the deployment part later. And really that comes down more to a question of, well, what are the tests that you have in place and are they sufficient? Because you're not going to be able to get to the point where you're actually deploying as frequently as I'm talking about if you have no trust in your test suite. So you're definitely going to need to work on helping improve that, but also doing so in a manner where you're looking for how can I make sure that it's going as quickly as possible. So that way you're not bogged down and looking at a build that's taking 24 hours.
Thank you, Jonathan. Hopefully that answers the question. We also have a comment regarding the link to GitHub that they can't access it. Maybe we need to review the settings of it.
It's possible. I'll need to go see if I set that as private. If I did, then I'll make sure that it's public for everyone to see.
Thank you. There's another question here. What portion of the perfect CI/CD features could be deferred until the business starts seeing the speed benefits?
The biggest ones that I'd probably lean on a little bit more. So the order in which I presented them was actually pretty close to what I would end up doing myself, where the focus is more on, okay, let's focus on the continuous integration side of it and making sure that we are to where we're comfortable with how quickly they're doing it, and then, or how quickly that code's being merged in and ready for deployment. So, and then working towards, okay, how can we get this to be deploying more quickly? Because again, you need to have that confidence in your test suite that it will catch you before you go and hit the deploy button. And sometimes, and obviously there's going to be varying ranges of what is the level of risk that the company itself is willing to take, as well as there's also just kind of the open question of how quickly are your customers willing to change, to deal with change, because that itself could also just slow things down, and you may not necessarily need to do a full deployment or to do all the features, because it's fast enough.
Thank you, Jonathan. And if you have any more questions, please continue typing them as we still have a few minutes. Here comes another question that says, how might AI assist in the process of documenting code while in a CI/CD context?
Documenting code. Hold on a second. I have to plug my laptop in. There we go. So when it comes to documenting your code, more often than not, that's going to come down to more a question of how you're working with the AI, how you're working with something like Copilot in order to write your code. Are you someone who is using it more kind of as a glorified IntelliSense or autocomplete, where you're writing the code along and then it's spitting out something and you're going, yeah, that looks good, and you're hitting tab and going on? Or are you doing something like, where you're prompting it with a comment and saying, okay, this is what I'm trying to do, and then it's outputting it? Because the former is definitely going to help you, both are going to help you with writing code more quickly, but I would kind of lean towards the latter in terms of giving you something where you've basically explained what the code you're intending to do is. Especially when you're dealing with a situation where the code itself is going to be complex or unclear, just basic from looking at the code. That said, there is some of that is going to be more, something that an AI really can't help you with, because you may be working on something and then go, oh, we're running into this particular business constraint, or we have this particular problem that we ran into, and I can't like prompt the AI to solve it in code, and I need to have some kind of an explanation that's present there. On the other hand, there also is the ability from something like Copilot is being able to say, hey, explain this code to me. And that on its own can be extremely valuable whenever you're dealing with something you're like, I don't quite understand how this works. And then pop over to Copilot and say, hey, please tell me what this is doing. And that on its own may be enough in order to get you going.
Great answer. Thank you, Jonathan. Hopefully that answers the question. And I don't see anyone else typing right now, but if you have a question, please send it our way so that we can answer it live. And in the meantime, I will take some time to thank you, Jonathan, for your amazing presentation. If I have to take a takeaway about your talk, is that we cannot afford to sacrifice either speed or stability. We can have both in the current world to make sure that everything is delivered as fast as possible for our users.
That's correct.
Thank you. Seems that there are no more questions coming. So I would like to invite you to our next talk next Wednesday, same space. That's about continuous innovation. It's called Building Enterprise Scale Platforms for Public Cloud Adoption with Andy Hazen. So please register in the same link that you used to register for this talk. And thank you, everybody, for your assistance. We enjoy to have you here.